Hello, this is a recording from our movement lab on games and play and using play to elicit different movements and to break down confidence barriers and to make sure everyone feels included. We do this with children and families, but also with older populations. It works particularly well. So we'll get straight into the call. There are Q&As throughout and some activities that you can jump into. There's also the PDF and the download that come with it, and we'll make sure that those are available. Enjoy.
So one of the things with the situational warm-ups we'll do a lot, if we're working with groups of people in their 20s and their 30s who already exercise, they're very happy if you say, okay, we're going to do some mountain climbers, and we're going to do some Spider-Mans, we're going to do this and that. But sometimes when you're working with older populations, the idea of getting people to do squats or specific movements isn't always going to work. So one of the things we do quite a lot are these situational warm-ups, where we get people, we try to elicit different movements from people, and we try to see what they provide us. So if I'll step back here, and one of the things I'll say is, okay, I want you to imagine that you're walking, but I want you to imagine that you're walking through a swamp. So without saying anything, I just want you to imagine you're walking through a mucky swamp, and you just kind of see what movements it is that the people give you. So I want everyone to go ahead. Yeah, I want you to imagine that you're walking through a mucky swamp. Good. All right, now try walking backwards through a mucky swamp. You're getting your feet stuck in. You're trying to pull them out. All right, very good. So you've come to the edge of the swamp now. You finished the swamp, but for some reason there are hot coals all over the ground. So now you have to move past the hot coals. So how would you move past the hot coals? Something like this. You want to move quickly? Very good. You're moving backwards. All right. So now as you're walking, you come up to a cave, and it looks like there might be a bear or something in the cave. So now you want to walk. All right. You want to try to walk as quietly as possible because you don't want to wake up the bear. All right. So now we're just going to try to walk as quietly as possible. Okay. Maybe go backwards a little bit like that. Very good. And now we're going to go into the cave. So we're going to go into the cave and we're walking normally. It's a nice, big, spacious cave. All right. But as you're walking, you notice that it's starting to get very narrow. Okay. So it's starting to get very narrow. So now you have to turn sideways. So I'm walking through the cave sideways, but it's getting lower as I walk through the cave. So I'm walking sideways, but it's getting lower and lower and lower and lower. Okay. And then it opens up. All right. So we can keep on walking again. But now as we're walking normally, but now it's getting lower and lower and lower some more. So I'm walking, it's getting lower, it's getting lower. You can't see me anymore because now I'm just crawling on the ground. All right. And we've woken up the bear, so we got to go run home. All right. So you get the idea of that. Now, obviously, that's quite tight. We can't really do it, and it's not the same without lots of people. But I wanted to open up with that to illustrate that there are lots and lots of different ways to coach, and there's lots of different ways to run sessions. And one of the things that we found a lot, especially as we work with older adults, that it's often not fair to tell people, okay, guys, today we're going to work on squats. Because even if you think squats are a great movement, when you're working with people in their 70s, you're going to have people who have hip issues, knee issues, things like that. And just telling people that for your warm up, you're going to do 20 squats or you're going to do specific kinds of lunges or something like that. If you start off saying this is the movement I want you to do, a lot of times it's not going to work for people. It's sometimes what's called rules-based training, where you say this is what a good squat looks like. This is what a good lunge looks like. Now I want you to try to recreate it. With when we work with older populations a lot, and actually really young populations, kids as well, we do more of what's called task-based training. So instead of saying, I want you to recreate this movement, we say, what we're going to do is we're going to present you with a challenge. We want to see how you can solve that challenge, okay? Can you get from A to B? Can you pick this up? Can you get down on the ground and get back up again? Can you get over the object, under the object, around the object? Things like that. And what that does is it gives people freedom to come up with solutions based on their own limitations. You know, if I told people, I want you to pick up this object on the ground, if I tell people you have to do it as a squat, not everyone's going to have a low squat, and not everyone's going to be able to develop a low squat, especially if they're in the second half of their life. So instead, sometimes what you want to do is you want to see what solutions people come up with, and then we work with that. All right. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the presentation, if I can find it. Hang on. I guess I got to do entire screen. All right, I'll try that. Okay. I can't see anybody anymore. Can someone go off mute and tell me if you can see it or not?
Yeah, we can. It is good. We can see
Okay,
it.
great, perfect. Okay, so what I was just talking about is this contrast between what's called prescriptive coaching and descriptive coaching. And we're not in the course right now, so I don't want to get into it. But a lot of this prescriptive coaching is what people expect when they go into a gym. All right, so you imagine the coach comes up and you say, this is the form I want you to do. I want it to look like this, this, and this. I don't want it to look like this. Now I want you to give me 10 reps of it or something. So this idea of prescriptive coaching is working towards a specific technique or a best way of doing things. So you're going to have lots of cueing, lots of correcting, really molding towards that one way. There's going to be a lot of coach talk, and there's going to be a lot of repetition as you get closer to this movement. So we're going to keep on doing squats until your squats look good. We're going to keep on doing press-ups until your press-ups look the way I want them to. This can be contrasted with a lot of what we do, which is called emergent training, where we ask people to solve movement problems and find a solution that works for them. In this case, the coach's role, rather than telling them what is correct and what's incorrect, the coach's role is to design a challenge that's trying to elicit practical solutions. So in this case, the coach is going to talk less, and there's going to be much more learner autonomy. So people are going to spend more time figuring out solutions for themselves, working with partners, working with groups. So much more focus on what's called wayfinding, discovery, play, and exploration. Now, there's some technical stuff behind this. I'll go ahead and share the slides with everybody in a second, so everyone will have copies of this. But actually, really what we want to focus on today is designing playful activities. So one of the games that anyone who's been in our course before has probably seen is Egg Snatchers, okay? And I'm actually going to go ahead and just show a video of it right now. But first, I want to think about how we design activities. So we were trying to work on some kind of skill or capacity here that people were trying to work on. And you won't be able to see the answers to all these other questions. Normally we do this in person, but I'll just show you a video, and I just want you to try to think about what kind of skills or tasks we're trying to develop here. So let me see. I'm going to stop sharing here. Okay. And I am going to try and share a window. Here we go. Share that. All right, can I figure this out? Maybe. Can I hit play? Nope. Yes. Okay. So what you see here is people are setting up. We're not telling people really how to set things up necessarily. It's just people are working with their partners in their groups, and they're trying to set up a challenge. And then what they're trying to do here is they're trying to explore the course that they're saying. Walking around trying to explore the course. There's nothing else going on other than that. People are just taking some time to see how everything feels, got their balance.
4, 3, 2, 1, and go.
Now you can see the actual game started.
I fell off.
Yes, you're in that. So we have about 20 seconds left. 20 seconds left. Start.
So they're almost done with this round. Now this is the final round, so we've changed some rules.
10 seconds left. 10.
Oh, no, they're still the same rules.
8, 7, 6, 5. All days are gone. You can start stealing. Look at that.
Okay, so in the final round, we decided to change some rules around a little bit. People voted on a rule change.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hands up, hands up, hands up. No, that's late. That's late. Nice try.
All right. Okay, so everyone can go off mute for a second now. So that's just an example of one of the games we play, Dragon Egg Snatcher. Okay, so it's got audio playing. If someone has a video playing in the background, is that me? It actually be me. It was me. Okay. So looking at that, what do you think? What kinds of skills or tasks were we trying to elicit there in that game? Any
I
ideas? Anyone off mute?
I quite liked the teamwork part at the start, where everyone's sort of laying out. You gave them autonomy to sort of lay out their own map as such, and sort of create around. So I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, why we do it that way. That's a good comment, Connor. Thank you. That there's a big aspect of co-creation and allowing people to design their own challenges. And this works on multiple levels. If as a coach, you just lay out the course as you want to, it's going to be based on your own capabilities and you're going to kind of impose how you want people to use it. And also when people create their own, they're naturally going to kind of modulate at a challenge that is interesting for them and interesting for their partner. It's this is another trick that we use a lot when you're working, especially with older populations. You're never going to be able to anticipate every single problem, every single limitation. Even if you think, well, this person has a knee issue and this person has a back issue and this person, lacks confidence, you're never going to be able to design something perfectly from the top down. However, if you're working with individuals and groups and partners, and you allow them to sort of create these little chunks and then reiterate as they need to, you're going to end up with a challenge level that works for you. So good, Connor. Lawrence, your hands is up. Mute. Lawrence, you're on mute.
Oh, now,
Okay.
now I've got it. Now I've got it. From my perspective, being an older adult, I think it's a lot to do with seeing how dexterity people are, how coordinated they are, how they balance, especially if they're balancing on one leg and being able to bend down, pick something up, or even if someone tries to destabilize them, how they react to that.
Yeah, that's very good. And we'll talk about the progressions on that when we talk about how we work backwards in game design. So we'll keep that in mind. Yeah, okay. So for this one, obviously we were trying to work on balance. We were trying to work on a little bit of teamwork, co-creation. And in the final game, there's some decision making that was involved. So we'll go ahead and talk about the ideas behind gameplay, how we design a game, and then what I'll do is I'll give everybody some resources at the end. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the presentation. There we go. Window. Hang on. Let's see here. Going back here. All right. No, it's not letting me share the screen anymore. Okay. Let me see if there's another way around it. Maybe I can share a window. 1 second. Got it. Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about ideas behind play today and why we think play is such a good way of getting people to learn. Here are some books that I recommend on play. Don't worry, you'll have all this in the notes. Question is, why play? Why is play useful? Well, play is good for developing physical literacy. You build emotional and physical capacities. It's a great way to challenge and develop a broad way of movement skills, ways that you can't predict. Again, this idea of emergent patterns. It's a way that people can perceive information. You're interacting with the real world, interacting with the environment. People learn to self-regulate. It's good for decision-making, action, sense of risk, and hopefully, most importantly, it's fun. There's lots of different kinds of play. So if you work with play therapists, they'll talk about the different play types. And a lot of what we'll do here is we'll work in different kinds of physical play. We'll also do rough and tumble play, where you actually work on interacting with other people. We'll do locomotor play. Those are generally the kinds of play types that we do in Wild Strong. Here's a nice quote, which I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just this idea that play begets play, in the sense that individuals taking opportunities to engage in spontaneous, meaningful, imaginative, purposeful play experiences can become more attuned to these opportunities throughout childhood, thus reinforcing their ongoing physical literacy journey. And this is just the idea that the more you play, the better you get at seeing opportunities for play, and the better you get at coming up with games. If you haven't played a game in a while, it can feel really hard to start playing. But once you start playing again, you'll kind of develop this vision and this sense of how you can inject playfulness into all different kinds of things. So there's lots of different definitions of play. So Peter Gray is one of the influential thinkers on play. And he says that play must be self-chosen and self-directed. It's an expression of freedom. It's not something that you're obliged to do. It's not something you're forced to do. So under his definition, if your parents were forcing you to play football against your will, he wouldn't really count that as play. It's activity for its own sake. So you're just doing it for the sake of play. It's an imaginative. So it's non-literal, not supposed to be serious. Free play has no structure. It's got structure and rules which are not dictated by physical necessity, but emanate from the minds of the players. So you come up with your own rules. It's not because there are real limitations imposed on you. And involves being active, alert, but you shouldn't be stressed. That's one definition. Stuart Brown, he's got his 7 properties. So it should be purposelessness. It should be voluntary. You should be attracted to it somehow. You should have the sense of freedom from time when you engage with play. You're not clock watching. You should have this diminished sense of self-consciousness. So you get into this flow state that people talk about a lot, where you're not worried about anything other than just having a nice time and being in the moment. There's opportunity to improvise. And then it's something you want to keep on going. You want to make sure that the play continues. It's not something where you want it to end. So I guess the question is, what is the difference between play and games? So everything I was just talking about was this unstructured play. But really what we tend to do add a little bit more structure, because that's what people come to us for. And sometimes games are actually fun because of the structure. What makes a game is that you come up with some kind of rules or constraints. There's some kind of objective. You want to win this, you want to complete this, you want to solve this. It doesn't have to be us versus them, but there should be a challenge that you can feel like you've accomplished. It's limited by the rules, so classic example is floor is lava. Okay. Walking around your house normally is quite boring. You impose a rule like floor is lava, and all of a sudden it's become really interesting because you have to change the way you interact with the environment. Sometimes play can have formalized roles, so you can have different positions on a team. That's not always true. And there should be some intrinsic motivation. So again, it should be fun. It shouldn't just be about winning. All right. So what makes a game fun? Well, you want elements of autonomy and agency. So players must feel they are voluntarily participating. Their actions have significance within the game structure. You want some kind of challenge, not too easy, not too hard. This idea of flow state again. There should be some novelty and creativity. So games should allow for exploration, experimentation, decision-making is a really big thing, and problem solving. There should be some kind of social interaction. So either cooperation, maybe fun competition, some kind of social bonding. All these things are inherently rewarding for themselves. You don't need to give people physical prizes, because just interacting with people in a spontaneous, fun, convivial way is the reward by itself. There should be some sense of feedback and progress. So you should have some idea of how you're doing. Again, not to be overly competitive, but there should be feedback in how you're performing. So some kind of point system, visual cue. Did you solve the problem? Did you get from A to B? Again, going back to this task-based idea. And then we want to create a nice, safe space of freedom to fail. Games should create a space where failure is not punished. I don't even like to use the word failure, where people have an opportunity to try again, reiterate, and see how things go. So I don't want to get into it too much today because I don't want this to be a lecture. But one of the books I really like is what's pictured here. It's called Nonlinear Pedagogy and the Athletic Skills Model: The Importance of Play and Supporting Physical Literacy, which is a mouthful. It is really good, and they have these 6 key principles for game design. All right, and they include this idea of environmental design, so focusing on the design of the environment to elicit different behaviors. This idea of changing affordances, so again, changing the environment to change the behaviors that people provide to create different challenges that people can solve. Manipulation of constraints. This is just adding or taking away rules. Co-adaptation and collaboration. This is a big thing, like Connor said. People are going to have much more fun if they feel like they're a part of designing the game and they can vote and they can work with their partner to set challenges. Number 5, this idea of managed chaos. And this I think is really important. Sometimes coaches can get really uncomfortable if not everything is under their control. But this managed chaos is where the learning happens, okay? You don't want to be all chaos all the time. But there is this leap of faith moment where you sort of set up the rules and people have played around and you say 3, 2, 1, go, and the game starts. And it's going to be a bit chaotic, but it's that ambiguity that makes the game fun. You know, sometimes when people talk about the importance of play, it helps people with their tolerance for ambiguity. And actually, one of the definitions for anxiety is low tolerance of ambiguity. So the more people play, the more they can develop this comfort with being in the space where sometimes you don't always know what the outcome is going to be. And then finally, they talk about this need for dexterity and degeneracy, which is a very specific vocabulary. So I've got all these laid out if you want more detail. When we talk about ecological dynamics and other models, this idea of dexterity is the ability to find a motor solution to solve any emerging motor problem functionally, quickly, rationally, and resourcefully. So essentially, it's just creating flexibility in solving different problems. Degeneracy, which kind of sounds like a bad thing, but in this case isn't. Sometimes you'll hear people use the word abundance as well. Degeneracy is the ability of system elements that are structurally different to perform the same function. So this is a bit complicated, but this is essentially, if you've learned a skill or a movement pattern in one context, can you go ahead and apply it somewhere else to solve a problem? So again, it's just thinking about improvising and coming up with novel movement solutions on the fly rather than someone telling you this is how you solve it. So if you want to design a game, the game that we talked about earlier is something that we call them dragon egg snatchers. All right. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to identify movement solutions you'd like to elicit, or you want to identify skills that you want to develop. You want to think about what are the constraints or the rules that are going to get people to move or come up with solutions like you want. And then you need to be prepared to improvise all the time. No game is going to be perfect. You're going to have different teams, different capabilities. People are going to be in different moods. You want to make sure that it's fun, but you need to be prepared to change things if you're not getting the results that you want. So you want to modify variables to increase or decrease various challenges, and then just always reiterate, always try changing the size of the field, the rules, whatever, until you find a set of games that work for you. So how to design a game? Well, you want to think about what skill or task you want to develop. You want to think about what you'd like the final challenge to look like. Then you want to work backwards with simple progressions, adding in complexity, decision-making, interaction, whatever kind of additional, nuances you want to add to it. And then you want to think about anticipating issues, limitations regarding environment, confidence, physical ability, and fun. So I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to pop out of here, and we're just going to have a little chat. Let's see here. Okay, cool. So with game design, one of the things you want to do is you want to think about what is it that you want to elicit. So what I'd like to do is ask people in the group, if you're trying to design a game, what are some things we can elicit? When I say elicit, I mean, what are some behaviors or movement solutions or tasks that we can try to pull out or develop in the group? So does anyone have any ideas or experiences with trying to design different games to elicit or pull out different behaviors or movements? Oh, yeah, sorry, Connor.
Um, yeah, yeah. Well, my background is just working with children,
Right.
primary school children.
Oh,
So
perfect.
we run a lot of outdoors uh, games and sort of sessions for them, and some forest school and things like that. But I mean, warm up games is a big part of what we do every session.
Yeah.
But they change the direction they've changed so much. Yeah, so it could be like a sneaking based game.
Yes.
So a popular one I'm going to do is it could be anything, call it deer hunter, but they're all the deers, and you're
Yeah.
like the main hunter that's circling in the middle, and they have to get from A to B, but they have to be hidden at all points, you know. So if you've got a woodland, that's perfect, or if you've got an open space, they can freeze, crawl, go on the ground, kind of things like that. So
This is, I was going to say, this is a really, when people think about listening things, they think, oh, we're going to try to build strength, or we're going to try to whatever, build like jumping ability or something. But it's such a good one, like working on stealth and being quiet, moving as quietly as possible, sneaking up on people. Where'd you get the idea for that? Is that something you picked up on your own, or did you get the idea from a resource?
I think so. I think probably saw something like similar in a resource, but I just from the feedback from the group, and sometimes certain groups they love like sneaking kind of
Yeah.
games rather than where some I work with are a bit older, they're like maybe more competitive edge, so more like a chasing kind of style one, and where there's some sort of catching element, or
Yes.
you're like pull a tail, which is a bib, or that there, yeah. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
no,
It's a big thing, is sort of figuring out what the group wants. We like the sneaking ones, and we've done sneaking ones with older populations as well, because again, there's all this tacit value in focusing on a skill like sneaking, where, if you think about it, when we're doing the tiptoe, actually working with older adults, trying to move as quietly as possible is all about absorbing forces and coordination. And same thing if you crawl. And I learned this in one of the last courses, the course, Lawrence, that you were in. I remember, we're talking about crawling. People always try to explain all those different ways to crawl, but just focusing on trying to crawl as quietly as possible creates this external focus where all of a sudden people start crawling in the way you want to, instead of just flopping around and falling all over the place. Having people focusing on things like being quiet is really good. So that's a really good angle to take it on. And as you said, Connor, not everyone wants to do the same level of competition. Some people can find it quite stressful, especially at the beginning. If people aren't used to playing games, throwing people in the deep end and playing games that are too competitive from the beginning, or if people feel like they're not good at it, that can be really challenging as well. So that's one of the things I want to talk about. Oh, Lawrence, mute.
Me, now you can hear me. I was doing yesterday, and obviously I haven't been working with groups. I'm pretty much alone. Although, funny enough, I've got interest of some local older adults, which are going to be doing something actually with trees. But so what I have a tendency to do when I'm going through woods, I will often walk across brambles. Now, yesterday I was walking across brambles wearing shorts, which is not
Yeah.
right. Something I feel absolutely happy. I'm lifting my legs up all over the place. I'm navigating. Of course, there's a vine I don't see, and I almost go flying. So just imagine a game where you're telling people they're walking over brambles, how they're navigating the brambles. So you could and seeing how, and I'm sure everyone would have a great laugh.
Yeah, this is a good example. And we actually do something very similar to that. That's a great example of a sort of situational challenge or a constraint. And we do that quite a lot. We'll do a lot. First, we'll try over-unders, where we just say, imagine that you're walking over some brambles and you don't want to get your legs caught. So, you just have people practice stepping over like that, which is pretty good. And then what you can do is you can actually give partners. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You could just get a broomstick or something like that, and you can say, imagine this is a bramble, and you could just have the people try to walk over it. And this is a really good example of when you're working, especially with older adults. If you put two people together, naturally they're going to find a level of challenge that is interesting and fair for that person. So one of the things we always say when we're working with our groups is we say, be generous and be creative. So you want to challenge people and come up with novel challenges, but at the same time, you want to find a level of challenge that's appropriate for that person. But that's a great idea, thinking of situations like that. And that's a good example of task-based training. It's like, so one of the things, I don't think you've seen this one, Lawrence, but one of the ones we get quite a lot is we get bits of, here we go. Brightly colored string, and you can get some brightly colored string and you can tie it up in a woodland area. And you don't want to do individual knots, just keep tension on it and move it around. And you can create a sort of laser beam challenge thing where people are trying to get from one side to the other. And you can do all kinds of challenges. You can throw bean bags in the middle and say that they're bits of gold. You can do a capture the flag thing. You can have people get from one side to the other for time. You can start thinking about all these different challenges that work. The other thing we use a lot, if you live rurally, if you've ever seen the plastic stakes that people will use for electric fencing, they're just sort of these long plastic stakes and they have notches in them. Those are great. If you can work with a farmer and get maybe 9, 10, 12 of those, you put them in around and then you can tie bits of string to them or put in sticks and things like that at different levels so people get past. And you can do all kinds of things. We have a game we call Electric Pigs, which is essentially like that, where you imagine that there's some piglets trying to escape from an electric fence. And people love that. And you don't even really have to explain the rules to them because people will know automatically. Imagine this is electric, get from here to there without touching it. And all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about explaining what proper form is. People will develop a movement solution that works for them. Good. Any other comments on I guess, task-based training, or any examples you've had of games you've played where you try to elicit a different skill or capability? Lawrence?
I'm not sure this is relevant, but I mean, I can send you the video, but I mean, I posted it on social media. But think about a ladder, right? And you've got to get to the top of the ladder, but you're not allowed to actually go one step at a time. You've actually got to go through the gaps. So you've got
I've
to
seen that video, yeah.
So that, I know it's not something you can say, and this are the things I love to do with my body. I like to find something which is virtually impossible for me to do. I mean, I was up in the Peak District, and I was thinking, well, can I actually get through that gap?
Yeah.
And I suffer a little bit from claustrophobia. So, but it's an interesting exercise. I'm not, and I just think it's something very, very good for us to do.
It's a good example, Lawrence. One of the things that people talk about in parkour is this idea of developing parkour vision, where once you start moving differently, you see the world in a different way. And sometimes people will talk about perception, action, and perception capacities as well, where once you start training in these things, you realize you can do it. When you see a wall, it no longer looks like a barrier. It looks like an opportunity to make a game to jump over. So that's a good point. All right, I'm going to get back into over here. So we're talking about how to design a game, and I was talking about, well, first you want to think about what it is that you want to develop or challenge. Think about what you'd like the final challenge to look like. So, for example, I'd like to get a game where we have people balancing on planks. Work backwards, because you don't want to throw people into the deep end. So you want to work backwards with simple progressions. You start adding in that complexity, everything I was talking about, and then start thinking about issues, limitations. So I want to go over each of these points. So I'm going to go ahead and use the example of the first video, so you have something to reference. So the way we came up with that game is we said, well, I want to come up with a game that challenges dynamic balance in a variety of situations. So not just standing still, and not just in a predictable way, but I want to challenge balance in a way that people have to move around and make decisions. We want participants to practice moving quickly over challenging terrain while responding to changing variables. If we do that, we can't start off with that final game. So what a session might look like is you want to think about, well, how can we layer in this challenge a little bit at a time? So if I'm doing my warm-up, I might start off with some solo balance work, some kind of stationary balance work where you're standing in place doing some balance. Then working by yourself, we might have you doing some moving balance stuff. Then what we do is we might have you start working with a partner in a very narrow challenge that doesn't have a lot of variables. But then we can open it up and start adding more variables, more moving, more unpredictability, variance in terrain, texture, things like that. Then what we do is we might start adding more people in, doing small group constrained balance exploration. So that's an example of after people build the course, they just sort of walk around and familiarize themselves with it. So there's lots of people walking around. They still have to get out of people's way, but we haven't added a sense of urgency. We haven't added any competition yet. And then finally, once you've hit all those points, then the final result of the day might be a small group competitive game. And then what we want to do is we want to anticipate different issues. Like, is it raining out? Are things slippery? We need to think about, do people have confidence? If not, can we build their confidence over the course of the class? The other thing is not everyone's going to have the same physical capabilities. So one of the things I really like doing is this idea of giving people superpowers. So for example, in one of our classes for older adults, most of the adults are in their late 60s, mid 70s. And we have a few adults who are in their 80s. So the difference between someone who's 85 and 65 is quite big. So you can give the 85-year-old special powers. So for example, you could say that instead of only carrying one beanbag at a time, they're allowed to carry two. Or if you're doing like a tail grabbing game, like a tail tag, where people are trying to grab towels out stuffed in their waistbands, you could give some superpowers. They could have, for example, 3 tails instead of 1 tail, so they can still play around a little bit. So think about how you can change the variables so everybody has a good time. And then you always want to be changing the terrain depending on how it works. So if there's a game, if one team is obviously better than the other, maybe you can shift it so all the beanbags start closer to them, or maybe you can change the route a little bit so it's easier for them to defend. Let me see if I can get both of these up here. Hang on. Don't know if I can do this. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay. Besides some examples of balance progressions. So for example, and we've got loads of videos on this, but if you were doing a warm-up before you do things really complicated, you might just want to get people to start with some ear drivers or something where they're standing like this. Hang on, I'm gonna lower this a bit. And you just get people to try to get themselves off balance a little bit at first. So what I'll do is I'll say, I want you to lead with your ear. Okay, I want you to go over as far as you can and then catch yourself and stumble. And that's a nice little warm up, because what you can do is, if confidence is an issue, you can say, I want everybody to stumble. Okay, when you stumble, you're learning. That's where a lot of the benefit comes from. So you get people over the fear of stumbling. Then you can start adding in more complex movements. So maybe I'll start doing some cross-body touches like this. Try not to kick all my furniture, but get them to do some cross-body touches. Then I can try to get them to do, some hug the worlds or some arabesques. And then we can start doing some partner work. Jill? I'm going to have Jill, we can have Jill do some partner work just as an example. So once you start doing that, sorry? Yeah, you can also, Jill says you can also try this at home, which is true. Well, I mean, if you have friends.
Sure.
But one of the things that we do quite a lot is we do a lot of pushing hand stuff.
Yes.
So, hi, this is Jill. So the pushing hand stuff, let's do elbows, hands glued together, okay? And then you can just try to off balance the person. So I'm trying to get Jill to move her feet, okay? So you got elements of this, okay? And I overbalance myself. So Jill got me to move my foot. And then once you get that, we're gonna do last flamingo standing. Mm-hmm. So this is the same thing now, except we're trying to unbalance people with their feet. Okay. Then you get that. So you've done some individual work, then you've done some partner work, and then you can start adding in some small group work. And what you're doing is you're slowly building up people's confidence before you go into the big final set piece. And what you can do with this, and this is to what you were saying, Lawrence, you can ensure that people are having fun at every step along the way, as opposed to just throwing people in with a challenge that's completely inappropriate. I'm sorry, I can't read any of this. Jill's passed me a note, but I can't read it. Do you want to come on, Jill, really quick? Okay. No, Jill says no. All right. All right. So what I want to share now is I just want to share some resources. Actually, let's open it up to the group and then I can share some resources so you can get some more examples of games and stuff that you can play. So that's kind of an example of how we might handle a challenge like working at people's balance. But let's see if we can't come up with some ideas right now as a group to develop sort of a whole new game. All right, so take yourselves off mute as you want to, and we're just going to do some brainstorming. And if we wanted to develop a new game, how could we do that? So what we can do is we can come up with what skills we want to elicit, what we want the final activity to look like, and then we can kind of work backwards. So let's just get some ideas out and we'll see what we can do.
I was also going to say, if anyone wants to just post things in the chat, you can do that if you're not comfortable speaking in the group setting.
Okay, Connor?
Hand-eye coordination?
Yeah.
One of the skills, maybe?
So hand-eye coordination is a good one. And there's lots of ways we can do hand-eye coordination. I immediately sort of think of catching and throwing as one example, but it's not limited to that. So what are some examples of hand-eye coordination that we can try to challenge or elicit?
Could you do, so there's rolling things across the floor?
Yeah. So rolling is really good, and it's great. The good thing about rolling is there's loads of games already that are kind of based on rolling, and there's nothing wrong with using a pre-existing game. So what are some pre-existing games that we can do that involve rolling?
Like 10-pin bowling or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing
and...
wrong with doing 10-pin bowling with different groups, and then we can think about how we can modify it. So one of the things I'm thinking about, if I wanted to start adding complexity, first we can just have people practice rolling back and forth. We can have people practice rolling in different positions. So one of the things that's quite good is just rolling from a crawling position. If you want to get some more interaction or some movement, so if we're rolling back and forth, how can we start adding some decision making into that or some problem solving with the 10-pin bowling? So we've got the issue of the hand-eye coordination, controlling the power and things like that. All right. But what's a way that we can start adding in some more interaction with starting off with like a basic bowling? Sorry?
Can I just show you something I started to do? It's basically, just teaching myself to fall.
Yes.
But then you can add rolling into it as well.
Well, that's right. So falling and rolling games, there's all kinds of really fun falling and rolling and balance games. So you can think about what we were doing with the pushing hands before. There's all kinds of interactive games that you can do from different heights, teaching people how to fall in different ways. And a lot of it, you can just sort of practice pushing the person, letting people get off balance. So that's a really good one. In terms of the rolling and the hand-eye coordination, you can add a defense element. So you could have like a 10-pin bowling or even like kind of a cricket setup with some wickets where you're in a quadruped position and you're trying to pass, instead of trying to pass the ball back and forth, maybe you have two balls and you're trying to get them past the other. So you have to defend while also trying to roll things over. And we've experimented with things like that in our family movement days. And those are really fun because you get the quadruped movement, you get the defense, you get the interaction, and then you're practicing something like that. So if I decided that, okay, I want my final activity to be maybe a quadruped game where people are trying to roll to knock over, let's say each team starts off with 10 pegs and you're trying to knock them over, then you can start working backwards and think, okay, well, how can we get that? So first you might want to work on some crawling. You might want to work on some fun passing from a quadruped position. You could incorporate in America what we call a horse style game, where people take turns challenge each other to do more challenging shots. So you say, I want you to see if you can hit over a pin from here. Then you go a meter back, see if you can pin it from there. You can build that up, all right, until finally everyone's sort of ready. They have the core skills. You can put them into a big game at the end. But as you're doing that as a coach, what you're doing is you're watching the different groups to think, well, this person has a challenge right here. This person actually finds a quadruped position really uncomfortable. So how can we incorporate a superpower for them so that they can do it? So maybe we can have them. They have a rule where they have like they have two dowels they can use as walking sticks, for example, instead of crawling. Or maybe, well, this person is getting tired really quickly, so maybe we'll do something like if they manage to score a point, it's worth 3 points, things like that. So again, just this idea of modifying as you want to. Jill?
Just in answer to Andy's comment in the chat, and there are ideas for games that are intergenerational and that can involve both adults and kids in a meaningful way. We quite often, when we're doing the multi-generational games, we'll add, if we've got the grannies and the grandpas there, we'll add kind of superpowers that they can have within the game setting. So we were playing a game the other day where you had to grab the tails, the piece of cloth from people's trousers, and there was one quite elderly lady who's 85 or 6 and couldn't move quite as fast, so we gave her 2 tails and she was allowed to tuck them in a little bit deeper into her pockets, so she had an extra superpower and could kind of fend people off. She also had them hanging out of the pockets on the front, so it was easier for her to defend, which meant that she could kind of play along as well with the other older adults there.
Okay. Sorry, Jill. I was trying to share the slides with you. It doesn't look like there's a share option in Google, so we can do it with email later. Yeah, with the multi-generational stuff, that's really what we want to think about is how can we create a challenge that's appropriate for everybody. And if the concern is older people with younger people, what you really want to do is you want to sort of give the older people enough advantages so they feel like they're still participating and they're having a good time. And also so they don't feel like a burden on the other team, because you don't want people to feel like they're holding the team back. So if you can do it in such a way so that some of the older people can feel like one of the star players on the team, that makes a big difference. And that's definitely one of the ways to make sure everybody has a fun time. All right, I want to share a bit of resources, and then we'll leave it open for the last few minutes. So I've got these slides. I can't share them in the Google chat, but I'll just go ahead and email them out to everybody in a second. So these are the slides that you've seen. I just want to do one more bit here. Okay. So in terms of resources, one of the ones I always recommend to people is Boing Kids, which is free and has about 150 different free games. So you can check them out. I've got a QR code there you can scan later. And Boing is really good because it has an emphasis on learner-centered, not teacher-centered, and they're really creative, things like that. They have a good way of changing challenges. And this is actually the last thing I want to talk about is how do we adapt games? It's a bit like what we were talking about with the superpowers. So different groups will have different tools for modifying challenge, and what you can do is you incorporate all of them. So if you're playing a game and something doesn't quite work, if it doesn't feel fair or even, you can think about, well, how can I restrict the space or the resources? Can I make it bigger or smaller? Can I add more or fewer resources? Would it be better if I switched up the teams? Can I increase the scale, make the challenge harder? If people feel like it's too challenging, you can reduce the number of decisions or possible options by taking away choices. That could be by making things smaller, pulling out options, things like that. You can add an additional task to make things more interesting. And you could do what's called freezing, which you say, okay, well, you're not allowed to use your arms, you're not allowed to use your legs, etc. There are lots of other tools for modifying games, and I've got resources here. There's the tree model, where you can change your teaching style, you can change the rules, you can change the equipment. So for example, bigger, small balls, smaller balls, heavier objects, lighter objects, or you can change the environment by making things bigger or smaller. You've got the step model, which is very, very similar. And this is, well, how can I change the space? How can I change the task? How can I change the equipment? And how can I change the team in terms of the team, who's involved, team numbers, to make it more fun? And finally, there's what's called the change it model, which is the same idea. It's about how do you change the incentives. And whenever you're playing a game, it's always important to think about all these different things to ensure that people are actually having fun. Other resources I really recommend If you don't know Park Play, you should look into Park Play. They're a really great organization. And what they do is they lead community play groups all around the UK. So you can check them out. There's another great resource from the Movement Creative. And the Movement Creative, they have a movement games section there. And what I like about this one is some of the games were developed during lockdown. So you have some games that you can do online or in small spaces. And they also have games that are designed to be done outside. If you're the academic type, you like to read books. There's a lot of the good books on gameplay don't come out of coaching. They come out of PE classes. So there's what's called the games-based pedagogy. There's what's called models-based practice and physical education. And this is just applying different theories and models. And then one that I really like that I've read a few times through now is cooperative learning and physical education. And that's all about how you can create low stress, inclusive environments for people. So I'll go ahead and get all those resources shared out to you. Where are we here? Come back here. All right. So we have just a few minutes left. So I want to kind of open it up to everybody. If you've got any questions or if there's something you'd like to talk about in the final 5 minutes that we have. So it's open. Take yourselves off mute if you want to. If you're feeling shy, you can go ahead and put the question in to the chat and Jill will go ahead and she can read it out. I know Connor's got something good.
Oh, I was just going to say, thank you. It's been really informative, but it was great to break down sort of like the game into the stages that you kind of said and what you're kind of like looking for, like as in the aim of what you want out of the game, how we're going to get there, what are the progress points. It was just really, really useful because sometimes, yeah, quite often I'll just play games with kids, right?
Yeah.
Or just get into one. And
you know, if the game works, that's the most important thing. You can make it as theoretical as possible. The number one thing is if the game's fun, you know, it works. The big thing that I found sometimes is sometimes I'll find a game on the internet and I'll look at it like, is this going to be fun? It doesn't look fun. And then you play it and sure enough, it's actually not that fun. And I'll think, why isn't it fun? And you'll realize, oh, because there's no decision-making or there's no way to modulate the challenge or, you know, all these sorts of things that actually like sometimes people will call something a game, but it's not. So one of the things I see a lot when people make games in physical activity is they'll just have you do something and then they'll add physical activity as a punishment. It's like, you're going to race to this. Then if you don't get there first, you have to do 10 star jumps or 10 push-ups. And a lot of times that gets sold as a game. And for some people, it might be. If you're really fit and you're in your 20s and your 30s and you love competition, that might count as a game. But if you're trying to bring more people in to do physical activity, using star jumps or push-ups as a punishment, and that's how you make it a game, generally most people would consider that fun. You don't want people to suffer too often. Jill?
Just a question from David about working or managing expectations of those who, for example, those who are used to doing sport in a certain way of sport/fitness.
Yeah, that's a really good question because people do have expectations. And if people have expectations on what they want fitness to look like, you know, do they want fitness to be a little bit miserable? Do they want the coach to yell at them? Do they want someone to tell them exactly how to do stuff? These are all challenges. And a lot of it is about creating norms and a culture in your group. So sometimes it's hard to shift if you do things one way and in the same class or space, you start doing things differently. A lot of times people won't like that. So I think it's important to create a new space, whether it's just calling it something different, doing it at a different time, doing it, you know, under a different umbrella is really important. That will help people with their expectations. And then a big thing is going to be how you create the culture of that space. Sorry, Jill.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit because
Yeah.
in our original group in Pangbourne, we didn't play so many games and then we kind of infiltrated them latterly. And I'd say that our Pangbourne group, because we started kind of coming out of CrossFit, so the sort of sessions we ran were more kind of like a strength and conditioning session that you would expect out of CrossFit, but a bit more mellow. We started incorporating the games into the warm-ups and just doing it as kind of before getting into the peer coaching and before getting into the warm-ups, and actually people find that they really like it, but we never led with any talk about play or games, because you could almost, I said this to Rachel yesterday, you could almost like hear the eye roll of people being like, oh, don't make me have any fun, or like enforced fun. But actually you find that if you start to weave in elements of sort of playful coaching where you get people working in twos, or just at the end of the warm-up, you will find that they actually, almost everybody enjoys a game. It's just the way that it is presented to them, and if you kind of spring it on them, they tend to be a bit like, well, I just want to get my 400 burpees in.
I guess within that, it's also important that you give people other options, because we still allow outlets in the Pangborn group for people to do those kinds of workouts if they want to. Oh, bye, Ali. Good to see you. Yeah, but I'm going to ignore them for a second because I'm working. You want to make sure people have outlets. You don't want people to feel like they're having anything taken away from them in that space.
Can I make a suggestion?
Well, one second.
Okay.
You want to make sure that if that's what people like, you can still ensure people. Well, you don't want people to feel like something's been taken away from them if they enjoy their boot camp style sessions. It's just about, like Jill said, how you fit it in and giving people space to experiment with it and seeing it can be fun. Sorry, Lawrence.
If you have a group of people, you're playing a game, and then you want to get them to get out of their comfort zone, actually ask them, what would actually take for them to be out of their comfort zone. So it gives an added element of challenge that might actually where they'll be quite happy to
Thanks, Rachel.
to involve them to do it. If you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think what's important as well is, as you work with a group, people will become more comfortable with sharing what they like, what they don't like, and things like that. It's the same thing when we do question of the day. At the beginning with a new group, people won't always be comfortable sharing, sharing their challenges, sharing things that they're afraid of, and things like that. But as you build that relationship, people can start talking about that more. And I think it is important to give people an outlet to communicate. And then also, on the other side of things, I think it's also just sort of interesting just to introduce things to people without asking them and see how they react, because people don't always know what they're going to enjoy or not enjoy. So I think it's important to find that balance. All right, good. We're at time, but I've got a few more minutes in case anyone wants to talk. I'll be here, but for everyone who does need to go right now, thank you very much for joining, and we'll get those slides and everything out to you.
Thanks so much for taking part. If you enjoyed it or you have any questions, please do let us know below, or just send us a direct message. We'd love to hear from you. Next month we'll be on specifically working with mature populations. Hope to see you there.